Broadcast of this program is made possible in part by the South Carolina Farm Bureau, online at scfb.org.
Broadcast of this program is made possible in part by the South Carolina Farm Bureau, online at scfb.org, and by Time Warner Cable, online at timewarnercable.com.
And welcome back to This Week in the State House as the General Assembly continues on this session of legislation as to where they're going to go and what they're going to do. 518 of the block bill, and really going to find this exciting because we're going to be talking about a House bill. Was it, shall I say, artfully drawn, or wasn't it? Are there problems with it? And I know that Representative Merrill and others really find this show exciting because it gives them the facts. Before we do, I want to thank our sponsors, Time Warner Cable, and of course the South Carolina Farm Bureau for making this broadcast possible, and the South Carolina Educational Television Network for their production of this, and the South Carolina Press Association for their assistance in putting this program together. With that, let me introduce to our two guests, and then we'll introduce our subject to 518 of the block bill and the people of South Carolina on what this show's about. First, Democrat, Richland County, Senator John Scott. Senator, how long have you been in the Senate?
6 years.
6 years. Right next to him, Senator Tom Davis comes to us. He's a Republican. He's from Beaufort County, and I think are you just totally in Beaufort now?
Beaufort County, a little bit of Jasper County, and I came in the same time Senator Scott, so we're same class.
All right, so y'all are on equal footing on that. What we're talking about today is a piece of legislation that came across from the House of Representatives to the Senate. It's the next bill up. It's called, Is There Such a Thing as Nullification? Is the bill a nullification bill? Can the state of South Carolina nullify the Affordable Care Act, or can it? That's the issue today, and I'm going to start out with both of you and give you a chance. Is the House bill, first, before we go to whatever we're doing in the Senate, is the House bill a nullification bill? And if it's an attempt at nullification, what is it attempting to do so that our viewers first understand what we're getting ready to look at, and should it be changed?
As you're aware, the Affordable Care Act, which has taken on the second name of Obamacare, has been Congress, especially in the House of Representatives, and Republicans across this country have been totally against Obamacare, Affordable Care Act. That piece of legislation has gone before the U.S. Supreme Court. They deemed it as being constitutional. That has not been acceptable to the Republican Party, especially in Congress. It has then spilled over to local government and also to the House of Representatives. They would like to nullify what the Congress and the Supreme Court has said is the law of the land. I don't think anything that we will do in this bill will in fact change the outcome of what the U.S. Supreme Court has said. When you take the president and his administration to court and you lose, accept it and go on.
Are you telling me then your reading of the House bill is it's an attempt at nullification of federal law?
A federal law.
And a federal law that's been to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Correct. I mean, I don't...
That's how you see the bill before we take up an amendment?
That's correct.
All right, now let me go to Senator Davis. Senator Davis, you've seen the House bill. I know you've been active with an amendment. We're going to get to that. What's your take on the House bill? What is it attempting to do?
Well, there's a little bit of sleight of hand involved with the House bill in that in the preamble, which is rather lengthy, it talks about the right to nullify a federal law that the state believes is unconstitutional. It talks about the 10th Amendment. and rights being reserved under the states and the people respectively unless they've been given to the federal government. But it's a lot of sound and fury, because when you get into the bill itself, it really doesn't talk about nullifying the Affordable Care Act. And by nullification, what we mean is, despite the fact that Congress has passed this law, and despite the fact that the President has signed it into law, and the United States Supreme Court has declared it to be a constitutional law, despite that fact, the nullification theory goes, we're going to declare it illegal in South Carolina. And we're going to go ahead and put, state troopers at the state lines, and anybody who comes into South Carolina attempting to enforce the Affordable Care Act is going to be arrested and thrown into jail. We can't do that. That's not what we're doing. Nullification is something that John C. Calhoun advanced back in 1831 in regard to the Tariff Act. For better or worse, some might say for worse, some might say for better, that particular issue is settled. And so what's before us right now in the Senate, and quite frankly, it wasn't even in the House, is something different than nullification.
All right, we're going to come to that. Before I leave the House bill, let me now go to, and if I've cited the wrong case, please correct me, but I believe people call it the Prince case. And that it's kind of the landmark case, so to speak, in terms of those who debate what is the power of the state in regard to a federal act and what it's not. Would either or both of you like to take a bite at what you see as the Prince case? Because I think that sets the foundation for us going forward to the debate in the Senate.
It does, and I think it sets a legitimate foundation, and it frames the debate in the proper terms. And what the Prince case, which was decided by the United States Supreme Court in 1999, says is, despite the fact that a law has been passed by Congress and signed by the President and has been declared constitutional, is the state obligated to spend its money? Is the state obligated to direct its officers and officials and agencies to help implement that law? And what the United States Supreme Court said was, no. I mean, the states in the Union are not merely political subdivisions of the federal government that exist for the convenience of implementing a federal law. I mean, they're sovereign entities. And so the federal government, with the Affordable Care Act, they can set up a federal health care exchange, which they have. They can have navigators go out and try to enroll people in the federal exchange, which they have. But what the federal government cannot compel the state to do, and what I think the debate is about now in the Senate is, the state cannot be obligated to spend its money. It cannot be obligated to spend our tax dollars to go ahead and implement something that I think is a bad law. And the question boils down to this. If you think the Affordable Care Act is bad public policy, as I do, and if the state is not obligated to spend its resources to help implement that bad law, why in the world will we do it?
The challenge of all of what my good friend Senator Davis has said is that in a state that receives spends about $6.2 billion last year and $22 billion total, most of what we spend is federal money in the state. And so when we began to debate issues whether or not we're going to accept federal prisoners into our prison system in which they pay for, we're going to do other things as it relates to public safety issues than which the federal government pays for, as we deal with most of the mental ill patients in the state, in which the federal government pays for, as we look at our Department of Social Services program, in which the federal government pays for. The federal government basically operates most of the funding we actually have in the state. And so it's going to be very difficult to separate those programs that belong and the federal government pays for from what we do. I really think the debate we're having on this particular bill is really a waste of time. We've got a lot of other issues we need to accomplish in the state, and to go back and deal with nullification, I think the citizens of the state deserve a lot more. I think really what happened is that going through all of what's on the calendar, they woke up and this bill was up for debate. On yesterday, I'm only watching a couple of people coming across giving some information about nullification. What are we going to nullify? Are we going to now say to the federal government, we are strong enough in the state to operate off a $6.2 billion budget? That's ludicrous. That's not going to work.
Well, but to both of you, the Prince case, as I understand it, I have a similar understanding constitutionally of what you've indicated, Senator, that the court seems to say that the state can't be forced to spend money to carry out a federal law. So isn't the debate, first of all, in the Senate, moving away from the House bill? The House bill, is the House bill at where the Prince case is, or is it at something different so our viewers know what we're getting ready to debate in the Senate regardless of whether the two of y'all are on opposite sides on that bill, so the viewer understands. Is the amendments y'all are getting ready to put up, are they more in line with the Prince case than with the old Calhoun doctrine of nullification, so to speak?
My impression is that they're in regard to the Prince case, and that the amendment that is on the desk and we're debating is a strike and insert to go ahead and replace the House bill to discuss how to implement the principles of the Prince case in the context of the Affordable Care Act. And so, again, let's talk about what we're doing here. The federal government can do certain things, and certain things that the federal government does are good. And some of the things that my friend Senator Scott has said are some good things that the federal government does. But that doesn't mean that when the state thinks that the federal government has done something that's bad public policy, it doesn't mean that the state has to spend its resources to help implement that particular thing. In other words, it's not all or nothing. Simply because we exercise our rights as a sovereign state not to aid and abet in the implementation of a particular bad law doesn't mean that we don't recognize that the federal government has the right to properly act in other areas. And so, what we're debating right now, I think, are perfecting amendments to my amendment, which characterizes this bill as more of an anti-commandeering bill. And that's sort of the lexicon that's used when we're talking about the Prince case. And so we're really talking about, can the federal government expect or insist that the states use their resources to implement a federal law? It's not about nullification. I mean, the federal government has a law that's been declared constitutional by the United States Supreme Court. I think it would be foolish for us to go ahead and say, sorry, despite that fact, we're going to go ahead and arrest anybody that tries to implement this law. That's not what we're doing. But by the same token, we don't have to use our state resources to implement something that I consider to be bad public policy.
But I think your question is, does the House bill have anything to do with the Prince case? The answer is no. The House bill is dealing with nullifying what the federal government has put in place and what the U.S. Supreme Court says is the law of the land. Now, what Senator Davis has deals with the Prince case. That amendment has not yet passed. It's still up for discussion, still up for debate. And we'll have to see what the end result of what the Senate will report out on nullification. It's two different issues altogether.
Well,
that's why you got the...
And actually, let me go ahead and say this, because I feel myself being set up for a germaneness argument in case it hasn't occurred. But what the H3101 stands for is, how can a state legitimately push back against the Affordable Care Act? What are the various tools in our toolbox that we have? And it does touch upon...
You think they should push back?
Yeah, they should push back.
You think they should?
They should.
Right.
All right, good. We've now clearly identified both of you for the debate. Let's go to your amendment. What does your amendment do?
My amendment takes what the House passed and perfects it. My amendment goes ahead and takes what the House inartfully said and makes it very specific and very clear as to what we intend to do. The House, if you look at the 5 or 6 things that they attempted to do in their bill, they do talk about not having state resources being utilized to implement certain aspects of the Affordable Care Act. They do talk about not exercising the right to expand the Medicaid population as authorized by the Affordable Care Act. They do talk about not setting up a state-run exchange in South Carolina. So, what my amendment does is it takes the House amendment, stays on that subject matter, but states it in a way that is constitutionally correct and that is clear and that removes any ambiguity to the community out there as to what we're doing.
Are you persuaded by that? And I hope Zachary and Associates took down notes on all that you just said.
Not whatsoever. We got a long way to go on your amendment before we can come anywhere close to agreeing on any or all of what your amendment does. I think one thing out of all of that, since the nullification.
Well, do you like that amendment?
Not at all. Not at all. We're gonna probably have a long discussion on this amendment. We're still not out of the water first, and rather not, this state will even accept Medicaid expansion funds. That's number one. The other part is whether or not we accept the funds or not, other states are going to take the money in. The real reality is because we did not accept the money, there are more and more people now who have been added as eligible individuals on the Medicaid roll. So now I'm beginning to question with the 325,000 people that were out there from the very beginning, were most of these people already eligible at the time that we looked at the statistics of it. So either way, we're going to expand Medicaid. Our challenge down the road is how we're going to pay for it. I know the argument has been that after the federal money is long gone, the state, in fact, is going to have to cough up money it doesn't have. Well, let me say this to you. We're now debating $200 million extra dollars worth of what people call surplus money that's not surplus money. And what we've actually done is rolled back a lot more of what we should be able to pay for in Medicaid, such as adult dental. And most of us know in rolling back those kind of cares, we create other health problems for adults. So in this state, if we so desire to really take care of the poor in the state and those who can afford, who need those services, we can do that. We just, because of the wave in Washington and because of the total dislike for President Obama's administration, this is why we're at this point, talking about Medicaid expansion. I've not seen anything yet that the president has done that any Republicans like. Everything is bad, nothing is good. But at the same token, in this state, we're looking at the growing poor population, growing of individuals who need better education in the state, growing where health care is becoming a major issue in the state, and we're spending our time trying to figure out how not to take in money to take care of those people.
You think the federal government will live up to its promises?
You know, and that's a great question, in that if you look at the $17 trillion debt that the federal government has, and that the way that they pay for it is by selling Treasury securities each week that are bought by primary dealers and then bought by the Federal Reserve that prints more money to buy them, it's a house of cards, and it's going to tumble at some point in time. And so the question becomes, do we go ahead and take on obligations that we know down the road we can't sustain? I don't think that's prudent. I think that Tony Keck at HHS has the right approach. He's saying, we've got people right now that qualify for Medicaid. We need to go ahead and take care of the neediest of South Carolinians. We need to go ahead and make sure they're enrolled, make sure they get care before we go ahead and increase it from 1.1 million to 1.7 million. I mean, you take care of those who are neediest. That's what Tony Keck is doing. That's what the governor's talked about doing, and I think that's the appropriate thing to do. To go ahead and expand our Medicaid population from 1.1 million to 1.7 million on the premise that the federal government's going to be able to go ahead and keep itself financially solvent over the next few decades, I think is foolish.
Do you agree with this assessment?
No, because because of Medicaid expansion, because of a closer look at the population, it's already expanded, but it didn't expand to the qualification of those who meet the Medicaid expansion. It is expanded because those people already were Medicaid eligible. And so we still now have some of the same problems that we anticipate that we were going to have, but this time without the money. I want to speak also to what Congress has done as it relates to where the debt is. And the good thing that the president has done, he's bringing the troops home. You cannot be in 3 wars and not expect to have a lot of debt. As we continue to pay off the debt of the wars, we're going to see revenue in the country come back. We're going to see the country continue to grow. We're going to see money be invested back into local government and states so they can expand programs and we can put people back to work.
And that's just a fundamental disagreement I have with my friend Senator Scott. I mean, I have a less optimistic and sanguine view of what the federal government's going to be able to do in the years to come. I see no resolution by Republicans or Democrats up there to curb entitlements. I see no will to go ahead and really do something about that $17 trillion debt. It continues to increase. We continue to expand the monetary base. You know, I fervently wish that my friend Senator Scott is right. I hope that he's right. But I think it's imprudent to go ahead and make state commitments on the assumption that federal government's going to go ahead and get its act together. I don't think it will.
Well, that means at home when we make investment back in our education system, our economic development system, give up tax credits to companies that come in. We close our treasury because we are making investments for the future and hoping that we're going to grow our economy and things are going to work. And again, let me remind you, the House of Representatives is not run by Democrats now. It's run by Republicans. It's their responsibility now to put in place provisions and plans how we grow this economy back.
Well, I think, you know, and again, it's a difference of opinion here, but when we're talking about growing our quality of life and we're talking about growing our economy, with all due respect, it's not going to happen in the chambers upstairs. It's going to happen out in South Carolina with people working hard. I mean, that's the mistake we make in politics sometimes, is we think we're the straw that stirs the drink. We think that we're the ones that create the jobs, that we're the ones that create economic activity. What we need to do more often than not is get out of the way and let the private sector work, invest, save, and create wealth. That's what we need to be doing.
But we do have a responsibility to those people to make sure that first they're healthy, they're educated, they're trained, so as you bring these companies in, that we've given away South Carolina tax credits to, these people are able to go to work. And we're doing a very poor job of trying to do that.
The government does not have the obligation to ensure that people are healthy and that they work hard. People have that responsibility themselves.
We didn't say work
they
hard.
have the obligation themselves to go ahead and do the things to better their lives.
We didn't say work hard. We said educate, train, make sure they're healthy and can go to work. We spend millions of dollars. Most of the money that we spend in this state is in education.
How is government going to make sure people are healthy?
I didn't say government. It's to go make them healthy. I said we have a responsibility. In this state, it is our responsibility. That's why the state. The state.
Government.
Well,
State
you want to call it the government.
Okay, and that's
We
what
as
I'm
a-
saying. The state government cannot make people healthy. That's the flaw I
We have
respectfully
a
say in your premise.
responsibility to make sure that the citizens of the state are educated, are healthy, and trained, and can go to work. You cannot spend government money, the people's money, and don't make sure those things actually take place.
It's just a difference of opinion as to what I think the proper role of government is. There are certain things it has to do to order a society to make sure the free market can flourish. Certain things they have to do. Law enforcement, certain infrastructure, things of that nature. But when you talk about it's the government's responsibility to make sure people are educated, the government's responsibility to make sure people are healthy, the government's responsibility to make sure they have a good job, we just have fundamentally different opinions of what government's supposed to be doing.
We need to nullify the educational money that we send to higher education, public schools, kindergarten, and so we're not going to take care
Well, we
of that.
should do that. Put more money in people's pockets and let them take care of themselves.
That's not going to put money in their pocket.
Yeah, sure it will. If we stop trying to do so many things for them, they're going to have more money.
No, they're not going to have more money. And you
Where's it gonna
already
go?
know that, because if you cut off how the system is built in terms of how the economy rolls, just surely there will be no money.
All you got to do is look at North Korea and South Korea to figure out whether a central government that wants to do things for its people or a government that wants to go ahead and have a free market. You tell me which of those two countries is more prosperous, and I'll rest my case on that.
Well, that's your opinion, but I don't live there. I live here in South Carolina. I live in this country. In this country, we spend the buck of our money educating our people and trying to keep them healthy. The free enterprise system exists when these people go back to work and spend money back into those economies, back into those companies, and that's how you grow those companies. They bring on employees, and people then live productive lives.
We just have a very different opinion on what government should do.
Well, let me ask you two of you, throw another hot issue out there in a little bit of time we got left. Medicaid expansion. We got 5 minutes left on this big issue. Probably could have done a show on this. Medicaid expansion. Is it not, or is it going to happen in this session? Is it going to get debated?
I don't think it's going to get debated. Each time the Senate Democratic caucus put up anything for debate, one or two things happen. Either an objection go on the bill, or they carry the bill over. We never really get a chance to have a real debate. Maybe during the budget cycle, we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about it, uninterrupted by the other side of the aisle. I look forward to talking about it. I look forward to looking at, if not Medicaid expansion, what we do to make sure South Carolina is healthy.
I'll disagree with my friend Senator Scott in that we're debating it right now. It's a part of the amendment that I have on the desk, and one of the components of that amendment says we are not going to expand the Medicaid population as authorized by the Affordable Care Act. And
So that is in your amendment?
It is in the amendment. So if Senator Scott, and I want to hear what Senator Scott and the others have to say about the virtues of taking up that expansion of Medicaid. He's going to have that chance. Not only are we going to debate it, we're debating it now.
Well, I was getting ready to tell both of you, you can't say that you only get a chance to debate on this show, because this has been spirited and good.
Enjoy it with my friend.
So, on the Medicaid, you gonna make a pitch to the Senate as to why they should, I guess, defeat his amendment?
Well, I probably will. I'm going to let him talk a little while. He's doing a pretty good job of that talking, and then we'll get down to
I want to hear Senator Scott talk up there. He's equally good up there. I want to listen and take some notes.
And then we'll get down to the real facts, and normally I'll close with the real facts of how things need to work in the state and trying to move the state forward. I appreciate the other side of the aisle, of course, having a conservative view in terms of how they think things are going to work, but also have to look at what history has shown us in the state. that's made the state strong.
At the end of the day,
I
the
think
Senate,
I
the
think
best
we're
thing
going.
about the Senate is we're going to get to hear all those arguments and be very respectful in the Senate, as we always are, to hear both sides. We'll vote it up or down, and then move on to the next issue.
I think we're going in the opposite direction, but we'll just have to wait and see how that works out.
Well, let me ask y'all, we've only got 3 minutes left in the broadcast. Supposing that the Senate does take a position, how do you think it's going to resonate across the hall in the House?
I mean, based on last year, I think they went ahead and declined to expand the Medicaid population as authorized by the Affordable Care Act. The governor has indicated that if it comes down to her desk that we expand Medicaid as authorized by the Affordable Care Act, she'll veto it. I mean, so unless you're talking about 2/3 of the House or 2/3 of the Senate, I mean, there's not going to be a prospect for that happening here.
Well, let me ask you.
That's probably the only thing we agree on today.
Really? Y'all are easy to interview because y'all just take it and go right forward with it. And the little bit of time that we got left, one of the things that I've found disappointing in the Medicaid debate has been the failure to quantify what ultimately is going to be the uninsured population in South Carolina, regardless.
Right.
Whether you do or you don't. 2 ways you need to be able to measure that, because ultimately they're going to show up at the emergency room. Somebody's got to pay for them. Do you share that frustration?
I do.
Nobody brought a study or anything out that quantified it and gave you some facts and figures to look at.
Early on, there were some early on statistics that were out there. The numbers were like 325,000. And after the conversation really began and some folk offered some other kinds of products that were out there that people could in fact sign on to, we discovered we had more people that were eligible for Medicaid that really did not even need Medicaid expansion. But that's probably one of the things we need to do is ask staff to try to get us some real true numbers. And I'll take it upon myself to ask them to do that.
And you make a good point. I mean, and the conservative response would be that, yes, we need to improve health care access. Yes, we need to go ahead and give opportunities to people to get decent medical care. I just don't think turning that over to the government is a good idea. The government's never demonstrated to me, and I certainly think that history has shown in the last few months, that when they try to take over 1/6 of the nation's economy, they've made a real mess of it. So I don't want to go that route. I think there are other ways that we can expand health care access for our citizens.
But the real question, it doesn't really matter. As the good senator has already said, Senator Davis already said, either way it goes, even if we find that the numbers are very small, and the position that both the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in the Senate and the governor has taken, they just don't want it. And so does it really matter if the numbers have shifted to actually being Medicaid individuals? The question then is how now we're going to pay for those persons who are now Medicaid eligible.
Well, and with that, we're going to have to wrap it up because one of the things we're short on is time. I want to thank both of you for being on the show. Great debate, spirited and very respectful, and our folks had a chance to learn something about the issue. We'll be back next week with more issues here and This Week in the State House.
Made possible in part by Time Warner Cable, online at timewarnercable.com, and by the South Carolina Farm Bureau, online at scfb.org.